Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. There it is. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is going to talk about some generational curse, addiction, abuse, trauma, and guilt that she's been through in her life. So, guest, if you would please introduce yourself and then tell us a bit about you.
So my name is Brittany McEnteggart. I am 32 years old and I am originally from Fair Lawn, New Jersey. But I live in Ireland now since I was 19. And I am an author advocate. And I call myself a hot mess express because let's face it, life just life sometimes. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell, essentially. Thank you for
Great.
having me.
I love that. That's yeah, very to the point. So I didn't
Yeah.
realize, yeah, I didn't realize you'd have been in Ireland since you were 19. That is longer than I thought, but that's beautiful there, as we were just talking, beautiful there. So tell us a bit about kind of what is your story with the struggle with addiction, abuse, and trauma, and so on. Just kind of, what was all that about, and when did it start, and so on.
So essentially, my story starts before I was really kind of like on this earth, if that makes any sense. So my mother is an alcoholic, and she has been since she was about 16. She is a functioning alcoholic to a certain extent, which I'm sure many people will understand if you've grown up in that sort of like, child-parent relationship. My father was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And he really wasn't in the picture too much. I was raised by my mom and her brother. They always lived together and they raised me um essentially like a single parent household, but he put the roof over our head and obviously like we had food and stuff. I was reared in a proper home setting essentially because of my uncle. So I was born into this kind of lifestyle of addiction with my mom, and she always had her problems. I obviously didn't understand that as a child. I found out when I was in the process of writing my book that I was in foster care when I was only an infant, and that shook me because I had no recollection of that. Obviously, I was only about 6 months old, I think, or 7 months old, and I was in foster care when I was seven, and I was took away from my mom because of her drinking when I was seven. So that was the only recollection that I had had of that. So to find out that as a baby, this was so prominent and took hold of my mom and kind of like nearly ripped our relationship apart and stuff as well was such a shock to me. Like I always kind of knew that I was different. I always kind of knew that my home life was different. I didn't have a dad when I went home. And, people always talked about my mom because she was the alcoholic and, all this kind of thing. People are very judgy. People are very mean. Parents, I think the worst thing is, as a child growing up, like I saw it with kids, but like parents are very, very nasty as well.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up like in a very like nice, I wouldn't say like affluent, does that like mean like rich? I'm not great with words, but like, like a very nice neighborhood. And I went to a great school and, I didn't have a great group of friends, but I had friends and, I was always a little bit different. I was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 5 and I was very, very hyperactive. I had a lot of issues with my um, hyperactivity at that age. And then when I was 7, being taken into foster care kind of took a different hold on me. I changed as a child. I acted out a lot more. I struggled with the eating and all these sorts of things. So, like, my home life and my mother's addiction kind of essentially took its toll on me in different ways, although I didn't understand that at such a young age. Um, and I think for anybody who has a parent that has an addiction and, watches them fight it, like, it's so scary because like you're kind of just looking at them going, well, why am I not good enough for them to stop?
Mm.
Um, and for me, I don't have children yet, but if I ever do have children, I know that in my heart I would do anything for them. And I can't imagine being a parent that unfortunately lets addiction take over. And this is not like I mean that in the kindest way. I'm not talking, smack about anybody
Yeah.
who struggles because I get it.
Yeah.
But I think any child that has grown up into an adult that did grow up with that lifestyle, you kind of look back and go, well, why is it so difficult? And for me, I had so many questions as a child, why my dad wasn't around, why my mom was the way that she was, and why my family weren't really that bothered with me because my mom is one of six kids. So I always just, I never really understood like why my mom's issues, I'll call them, just say, affected me. I'm not my mother. I'm my mother's child, yes. But why is it that people look at me differently because my mom's an alcoholic? Or why is it that parents won't let their kids play with me because my mom's an alcoholic? Do you know what I mean? She was an alcoholic at night that I knew of, but there was obviously things going on and stuff during the day. But you know, growing up, that was difficult. And then I guess I wasn't shown a lot of things properly growing up. When we are growing up, we are so easily molded, and you know, um, I needed a lot more guidance than I had, and I was easily persuaded. I was very gullible, and what that led into my teenage years was seeking for love and validation and acceptance and all this like messy stuff in the wrong places.
Yep.
So that led me down a very dangerous path that led to abuse and led to a multitude of other things that now, as an adult, I have to heal from. And I just kind of sometimes wish I was born into a normal family with parents who had no issues and I didn't have to deal with all this crap, but I did. And I'm using it now. I could sit and cry in a corner about it, and I have my days, don't get me wrong, but I'm using the bad for the good now
Yeah.
and I'm hoping it makes a difference somehow.
So did you go back to mom after that stint in foster care, or was it 7 year old that you were gone? You didn't have mom after all at all after that?
So both times that I was in care, I was very lucky that when I was 6 months old, it was only a couple of weeks or something like that. I had found out she did some parenting classes, something like this, and I was allowed to go back home. That was fine. And I was in a foster care placement with my aunt at the time. So that wasn't too bad. I was still kind of within the family.
Yeah.
And then when I was 7, I was placed in multiple different family homes over the space of 3 weeks, and then put into a foster home for 7 months. And I guess there was like court cases and stuff like this. And the essential ins and outs of it were she had to do so many courses, had to go into rehab, and had to be clean in order for me to go home. And I did get to go back home to her, lucky enough, because I guess the judge, I think she said to me that the judge that particular day had seen a change and was like, no, she's okay to go home and stuff. But to be honest with you, I think it was only a matter of weeks or so before she had started drinking again. So, like, look, as I said, as any addiction, once it takes a hold on you, do you know what I mean? So I was lucky where I did get to go home,
Yeah.
but you know, I, I don't know. Do other people wonder like what would my life be like if I didn't and I had have stayed in a placement and stuff like that? So it's one of those things like you just don't know. But I'm lucky that I did go back home. Like there's no ill will there or anything like that. Like I'm happy that I got to go home because I missed my mom terribly. Um, but it's just one of those things, what if kind of question. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think I know what each of us experiences is our norm. I know I grew up with a very abusive alcoholic mother, and my sister and I were never pulled away, probably because it was an earlier time in the 60s,
yeah,
so we didn't step in as much to protect children as we do today. However, I often thought to myself, gosh, what would it have been like to, live in a normal family, or a family where, there wasn't screaming and yelling and fighting and throwing things
yeah,
and breaking things over my head. What would that have been like? But
yeah,
yeah, because that wasn't my life. It wasn't the cards that I was personally dealt either. So I get that
yeah.
sense. So at what point did you decide, I'm breaking free from this. This is not going to define me or who I am or where I go or things like that.
Essentially, like it was a messy road. So, like when in my teenage years, I kind of just started to stray into more difficult things like bad relationships, abusive relationships. And I kind of always knew I didn't want to be like my mom. And I feel terrible saying that because my mom's a great mom. It's just she had an addiction. Do you know what I mean? Like I was well looked after. I was always clean. I had the best of clothes and all this here stuff. But it's like there was a lack of like love and, protection and stuff like that. And I always kind of like knew that I didn't want to be like that. But
Hmm.
it took me a rocky, rocky road to kind of get to where I am now. So I was in abusive relationships. And then it was only really when I met my wife, now wife, that I was kind of like, oh God, I can't keep doing this. I was living such a chaotic like lifestyle and stuff like this. And I knew that I wanted more for myself. And I knew that at the time, I don't drink anymore, but at the time I was very, very into heavily drinking and stuff like this. And I just kind of knew that because both my parents had addictions, I was kind of susceptible to that sort of lifestyle. I knew I didn't want that for myself. So when I moved over to Ireland, everything kind of changed. And I slowly started making the changes for myself. And I said to myself, like, I don't want that. I don't want my like people to hear my name and be like, oh, she's so and so's daughter, and this is the way that she was and stuff like that. So like when I moved to Ireland, it was essentially a clean slate for me.
Oh,
And it was essentially a chance for me to rewrite the script and put an end to the trauma I had dealt with years prior and sort of the generational curses. Because like let's face it, like my mom didn't have a dad in her life. I didn't have a dad in my life. And, my mom's mom was amazing. But my mom, as great as she would, had her faults. And I kind of just thought, no, this isn't going to continue on with me. I'm an only child at that. So I had the opportunity to kind of put the generational curse to a halt and say, no, it's not going to keep going. So it was really when I moved over to Ireland, like that was my opportunity to kind of create a clean slate and make a life for myself that I was proud of. And like it didn't come easy, don't get me wrong, but you know, um, I wrote my book. I tell my story now with pride and knowing that like look, some of the stuff is very, very hard, but at the same time, it's what keeps me going. And it's the card that it's the hand of cards that I was dealt. Do you know what I mean? Like what else am I really
mhm,
supposed to do?
exactly.
So it's not
Exactly.
like I can go back and change it and be like, oh, let me be reborn on a different day to different people and stuff like that. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. So really, I just had to take what I had and do something good with it because, like, what's the point in sitting on that? So many people don't feel strong enough to speak up and stuff like that. And you know what? Look, I get it, it's not for everybody. But for me, it was, I'm not sitting with all this for no reason. I didn't go through all that crap for no reason. So that's just I knew from a young age, and it was just a process of getting to where I am now, because that's really what it is. It's a long process.
Yeah. Yep. It's a road to travel. So you wrote your book. Tell us about your book. I know it's called Resilience, which
It is.
sounds like a perfect title for it, but tell us about it.
Yeah, so resilience, I always had bits and pieces of resilience wrote. I never knew what it was going to be called, and I never really knew when I would write it, but I always knew from a young age that I didn't want to write my story. This is again before I went through half the stuff that I went through, so it was weird. Um, I was working in a hotel when the first lockdown for COVID-19 hit. So I essentially thought to myself, one day I was just sitting and we were living in my mother-in-law's at the time. I was just like, I think that this is my time to do this. I kind of just felt strong enough finally somewhere along the way. I was like, that was a great time. Now, bear in mind at the time I thought I had 2 weeks off of work. This is before the world got locked down for 2 years. Do you know what I mean? But I said to my wife Anya, I says, I think I'm gonna do this. And she was like, do it. And with that, I got all of my little pieces of paper, notebook out, and all the stuff that I had wrote, and I started to put a process to it. So I had made a goal for myself that I wanted to release the book on my 30th birthday, which was the following June. So with that in mind, I got to work, and it was very, very hard. I think I was months into it, and I still didn't know what I was calling the book, and I put something stupid on Facebook and was like, if you could use one word to describe me, what it would be, like one of these like little memes. And one of the girls that I'd worked with said resilient. And I was like, that's what we call the book, resilience. So that's where resilience came from. And I learned a lot about myself writing the book, oddly
Mhm.
enough. Like I had to heal from a lot of stuff. I still am healing. But writing it, like I know that so much of the stuff wasn't my fault now. And it was amazing. Like I got my wife's a graphic designer, so she was able to design the cover. She was able to do all the little things. So it was a really like meaningful process to me. And while I think that there's a lot of stuff I probably still could have put into the book, I'm leaving that for another time because like I do interviews like this, I talk to people. So like yeah, you want to read the book, but you want to know more about the person. So
Yeah.
it's me on the cover of a book and it's literally it's I'm sitting here looking at it on the bookshelf. I think I'm still in awe at the fact that I wrote a book and like it was so scary, don't get me wrong, because I had to go through so much of a process, making sure that this is okay. Oh, should I write this? Should I not? But no, I was very blessed. I found a great publisher and I found a great, editing team and design team and stuff like that. And it was a simple process as far as that. Um, it was hard writing it and I nearly ran out of time because I had to take breaks. It was so much, especially the last like 2 months of writing. There was so much trauma
Mm.
and reliving so much of it.
Yeah.
I at the end, the day that I submitted the actual full manuscript, I think I cried for about an hour after it because it was like, wow, I just did all that. I literally sat in the bath, I cried for an hour and was like, I was so pumped then because I'm like, no, do you know what? That's it. I was meant to do that. So it was a blessing. It was a ball of nerves. Don't get me wrong. I think I submitted it like St. Patrick's week in 2021, and then it was out the June. So I had all these weeks of like waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. It was so scary, but like I got such a good reception then when it was released. And like while it's a little quiet now and stuff like that, it's one of these things where I know one day at the right time it'll take off and it'll reach the right people, and that's the main thing. That's all I can ask for, really.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I am curious, as we talked about before I started recording, I published my book last year. That's a lot of personal stuff
Yeah.
as well. Did you worry about, the people that in the book that are still alive that might be upset or that might be offended or really, I mean, be unhappy with these truths being been exposed? Did you have any of that? And did you have any backlash?
Oh, I had every bit of that. I'm sure as you did, I had every single bit of that. And one thing I was adamant from the start was I did not want to change names in my book because I felt like I wasn't being true to myself.
Mhm.
However, my editor was like, you need to take a chill pill and realize that like you're asking for a lawsuit. If you don't, do you know what I mean? And I was like, fine. So, I got some legal advice and stuff like that. And I'd say throughout the book, maybe like 30% of the names haven't been changed. I swear there was just pages of names, but like a lot of the names aren't changed because I had to check with the right people, and then there are names changed because of like obviously legal reasons and stuff. Um, the way I look at it is, and somebody said this to me along the way, if they didn't want to be spoken ill of or have the truth come out, they shouldn't have done the things that they did to you. And my editor, she was big on this. She said to me, obviously anybody that's wrote a book knows their editor's reading it and sending it back to them. She was like, you sure you want to say this stuff about your mom? I'm like, hold on a minute now. I shouldn't be guilted
Mm-mm. Mm.
over, do you know what I mean? This, that. And I remember when the book got released, I think about 3 days later, she had emailed me and said, did you escape unscathed from your mom? And I'm like, are you for real? Like, do you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, like I didn't put myself through this stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I definitely had all this scary, oh God, what if this person reads it and they say this, this, and this? But what I can say with all confidence is I'm speaking my truth in that book. And nobody, much like yourself, I'm sure, can take that away from us because we're not lying about a single thing. Like, what do you gain from lying about something like that? So, in my case, I have had, especially in the past couple of weeks, was just kind of knocked me for six. I've had a few people from my past actually reach out to me and be like, yeah, so I'm not sure you wanted to hear from me, but like I read your book and I just want to say you're amazing. And I'm sorry I didn't do something when I saw this, this, and this going on.
Yep.
And sometimes you want to throw your phone because you're like, really? And then I was just like, it's the validation. I was
Yeah.
like, I knew I wasn't crazy. Do you know that kind of way? And I don't know about yourself, but it's just like when you write your story, you know that you're right. But it's like somewhere deep down inside, it's like you almost have this little twinge in the back of your head, like, nobody's going to believe you. Do you know
Mhm.
that kind of way? And it's like, I know that I'm telling the truth in my book. So anybody who wants to debate me on that or wants to fight me on that or say, well, why'd you write this about this person? Well, sit down and we can have a talk about that. Because at the end of the day, I went through some terrible, terrible things at a young age. And I'm 32 now. And I'm so glad it happened when I was younger because I don't think I would have been able to deal with it now.
Hmm.
So I had to deal with all of that when I was younger with zero guidance, and I made it out the other side. That's a blessing. So what more could you really ask for? I mean, yeah, I had all these like worries and doubts, and I still do, but like I have zero regrets about it
Yeah.
because I know that my story in one way or another is going to help somebody else.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
and that's it.
And as you mentioned, it's your truth. I know I had in my case, I had a family friend who's the same age as my parents reach out and say,
Mm,
if I had known any of this stuff, you should have spoken up, we could have this, we could have that. I'm thinking, well, I was a child and
yeah,
I didn't in my mind know I should reach out to relatives and say, hey, this is what's going on in my
exactly.
home. It didn't occur to me. This was my norm, this is my home. And to be honest, especially when it comes to physical abuse, I know there had to be signs that people could see. I mean, like I said, this is an
Yeah,
time nowadays you see children with bruises and things, you report that, but back in those days it didn't.
absolutely.
And I think in
Yeah,
school,
it was more normalized or something.
yeah, people didn't really want to be involved in that. So, and I almost felt kind of guilty when I would get that comment about,
Mm,
why didn't you say something, as if, it was my fault I didn't say anything or you would have said,
yeah,
and it makes that person feel like, well, I feel bad because I didn't do anything because I didn't know. It's like, well, okay, that's you. That has nothing to do with me, and it's not what I'm not trying to put this on you to say, why didn't you save me? That wasn't my intention at all. Now my mother is long deceased, so she was not
mhm.
around when my book came out. But I think, am I hearing you say your mother is still alive?
My mom is still alive. She isn't in the best health, but she's still alive. Um, my dad is no longer alive. He died in 2009. And, even with my dad, like he wasn't in my life, which we spoke on before, but there was a lot of chaos around my dad, stuff like that. And unfortunately, when I was 18, it was when I was allowed to go look for my father and the records and stuff like that, because like my mom and my dad did not, they didn't get along great, and there was lots of child support issues and stuff like that. So when I was 18, I had the free will to go out and like look for my dad, a
Mhm.
sort of thing. I'm sure that makes sense to somebody in the world. And so I turned 18 in June 2009. And what I didn't know at the time was that my dad had taken his own life in February. So it
Uh,
was 7 months after he had died that I had found out. It was only when I went looking for him, you know. And again, it's all broke down in my book, but it's just one of these things where I wish he was still alive because I wanted a relationship with him. I wanted it to be my choice. Um, but I know like he's there in spirit, and I know that he's proud of me, and I know at the end of the day, even though physically he's not here, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I went through would have been hurtful for him because I like as a father or as a mother, I don't like you kind of wonder, oh, could I have protected my child from this and this? But he had his own demons, and unfortunately he's not here. But my mother is now. My mother hasn't read my book. My mother isn't great with like reading that sort of thing, but she knows. But as again, any child of a parent who has an addiction, or as anybody out there who might be listening who is a recovering addict, it's the denial thing with my mom. She doesn't want to admit, do you know what I mean? Certain things.
yep,
So
yep,
she is still alive. I'm very blessed in that sense. Um, but there's a lot of things we don't talk about. So
yeah, yeah. It's funny you say that because I in my experience with my book, some of the family members that I thought that are still living that I thought were going to have the hardest time with it, don't or have no interest in reading my book, and I have a
it's
sense
always the way.
that might be, well, they must know in some level that
Yeah.
I'm probably in there and I'm probably not portrayed in the best light because of what I did
Yeah.
and do.
Because you
Uh,
had the audacity to speak up, like, do you know what I
yeah,
mean? God
you know,
forbid.
and I didn't do the name changing. I didn't do. I don't think I gave people full names that I can think about, but I think anybody who's mentioned that has a first name, if I use the first name,
Mhm.
I was also cautioned, be careful because, somebody might take offense to
Yeah.
that. A lot of the people in mine are no longer living for one thing, but on the other, I thought all of this is true. It's not, you can't accuse me
And
of,
that's the thing. If you were making things up, you can kind of understand like where you get the. And I'm so mad at myself because I was adamant. I was like, I'm not changing names. I'm not
yeah,
changing
no,
names. And then my editor was like, you have to change names. I'm like, oh,
yeah, no, whatever. I'm not judging you for having done so. I'm just saying, to me, it was kind of like, what? No, if they have something they want to add in and say, hey, yeah, whatever. But for the most part, and I was surprised that those were the people that didn't want to read my book. And I thought, oh, that denial. Oh, I get it. I get it. I get it. If you don't
You're
read it,
like, yeah, no wonder
you
you
don't have
don't
to,
want to read that. That's
you don't
right.
have to face it and you don't have to know it. Oh, this kind of, it was like kind of like, okay, it was
Yeah,
surprising, but not surprising. I mean, I don't know why I was
yeah,
surprised by it personally, but I remember thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe you could help yourself by reading that and then, knowing a little bit more about,
yeah.
who you are and what you did and what you could have done
Didn't
differently.
it?
You can learn.
Yes.
So great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share? I mean, we're going to link to your book in the podcast notes when your episode airs, but anything else you'd like to share for any listeners?
I just really like my message really to people is very simple. I just want people to know that they're worthy of being heard. Like, I wish that I had of having somebody when I was younger, like, you are worthy, it's fine, all these sorts of things like I can say to other people now. Like, all I ever say to people is like, just remember your resilience. Do you know what I mean? And like, I don't care how big or small your trauma is, it's worthy of being heard.
Yes.
And another thing that's massive for me is your abusers, whatever form the abuse was, they made the choice to do that to you. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. People really, really need to understand that it's not the guilt that we feel as survivors is so unnecessary because we didn't do these things to ourselves. Um, like just know that it's not your fault and just speak your truth. At the end of the day, if you're telling the truth, like we've just said, you have nothing to hide. And at the end of the day, you speaking your truth could literally change somebody else's life.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. I know it's very uncomfortable for some people to talk. Don't get me wrong, I can imagine. I know it's uncomfortable for me sometimes because I'm afraid of the judgment. I'm afraid of, people, the looks and all. But when you get it out and somebody might say to you, oh my God, I thought I was the only person.
Yeah.
It really, it frees you in a whole different way. So that's just speak your truth. That is my best advice to anybody, whether you read my book or not, is just speak your truth.
Yeah.
Because somebody somewhere in the world needs to hear it. And I have doubted myself so many, so many times. And when I get really, really down and I forget why I'm doing what I'm doing, I literally just remember all the people like me, younger versions, older versions, who don't have somebody to speak up on their behalf. And I'm like, no, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So you have to speak your truth because it's super, super important because you could be saving somebody's life and
Yeah.
not even knowing it.
Yeah.
So
And
that's just like
I'm so
my
impressed.
best bit of advice.
And I'm so impressed. You're not quite half my age, but for you to be this knowledgeable at your age is impressive. So good for you, and good for you for
Thank
speaking your truth.
you.
I only I would add to that is if some people who don't want to, share the details, fine, be able to say,
Oh,
I
yeah,
had crappy things happen to me. You can just throw that's part of the, you open the door and say
that's it.
it's happened,
Yeah.
and we can go on from there. But you don't have to do like you and I did and put
Yeah,
it all.
and you know what? I don't even mean that in any like malicious sort of way. Like people don't want to share their details. That's absolutely fine. I just mean let people know that you can understand them. Do you
Yep.
know what I mean? Like there's
Yep.
so much judgment these days and there's so much misunderstanding these days. Just to have somebody look at you and just be like, hey, I don't want to talk about it. That's fine. But just know that I believe you and I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That makes the world a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It really, really does.
Well, Brittany, thank you again for being my guest today. It's been fascinating to chat with you,
Thank
and
you for having me.
absolutely. Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and other online book retailers.